Greetings everyone, welcome to the 7th episode of Churches of Wales Season 1. In this series, I take a look at buildings part of the Church in Wales and covenanted churches in Wales. In the last episode, I looked at churches that are situated around the towns of Llanidloes and Machynlleth, and that marked the final episode of me looking at churches in the historic county of Montgomeryshire. In this episode, I will begin looking at churches in the historic county of Radnorshire, where I will look at churches to the northwest of Knighton. I am Fabian Musto, and I present you the first season of Churches of Wales. In order to find these churches, I will use the Ordnance Survey map on Geograph as my reference for spotting church symbols, from maps of the 1920s, to maps of the 2010s and 20s. I apologize if some of my pronunciations of these place names are incorrect, since I am not a Welsh speaker. The first place I am at is tens of yards south of the boundary with the historic county of Montgomeryshire. This Baptist chapel is by the A483 road from Newtown to Bilthwells, and was built in 1908 of the simple round-headed style. The building closed for worship in the late 20th century, and is now a private house. Situated some 2 miles southwest from that chapel is a rural Baptist church, founded in 1815 by the Irish Hay family, who lived in a nearby hall north of the chapel. The building was Grade 2 listed in March 2000. Those chapels are in the community of Llanbadarn Fanedd, and this village has a parish church dedicated to this Welsh saint from the early 6th century. The church building was built from 1893 to 94 by S. W. Williams, constructed on the site of a medieval church. The architect retained some medieval features like the nave roof, and the stained glass in the east end window was installed by Celtic Studios of Swansea in 1979. The church was Grade 2 listed in July 2004. Situated a mile southwest from the village is a rural Baptist church, first built in 1805 and rebuilt in the vernacular style in 1857. The site was presumably a Quakers' meeting house prior to 1805, with some Quaker burials in the churchyard. This was Grade 2 listed in March 2000. Situated between the A483 road and the River Thon is a small church, rebuilt from 1876 to 77 by David Walker of Liverpool. The name of the settlement takes its name from the patron saint of this church, and Walker retained this exquisite rood screen from 1500. The screen was described as the most richly decorated medieval rood screen in Wales, as well as one of the most complete examples of a medieval rood screen in Wales. The church is now in the care of the Friends of Friendless Churches, and the building was Grade 2 star listed in July 2004. Here is the parish church in this village and community, situated in an oval churchyard which suggests an ancient foundation, and the church is dedicated to this saint from the early 6th century. The East Bell Tower was built in the 16th century, and it stands on a steep site as well as the church building. The nave was first built around 1300, and the chancel was built in the 16th century. The building was altered in 1752 and restored in 1908. The roof of 18 bays dates from the restoration, but is based on the original roof of the 16th century. The rood screen in the chancel was restored in 1908, and this was built in the 16th century. The church building was Grade 2 star listed in October 1951. Situated south from the parish church is this brick building in the simple round-headed style, and this is the former Wesleyan Methodist Chapel of 1836. This was built by the Reverend David Lloyd on land he owned. Placed 2 miles east from Llanbista is the Pound Chapel, an English Baptist church first built as a primitive Methodist church. The site of the first chapel was situated northeast from the present chapel, since the building behind me was built in 1896. The old chapel was demolished during the 20th century, and both of these buildings are situated by the B4356 road. Placed north of the Heart of Wales line is this English Baptist chapel, known as Gravel Chapel. First built in 1844 and rebuilt in 1878 of the simple Gothic style, the building was repainted in 2020. The building is by the B4356 road. Some 2 miles southwest from Gravel is a former primitive Methodist chapel, built in 1863 of the simple Gothic style. This was converted to a private house during the 20th century. Here is the first settlement by the River Lugg, and this parish church is also the first church by the Lugg. The church is dedicated to this saint, and the medieval church was built on the site of a monastic cell from the 5th or 6th century. The church was rebuilt by John Middleton of Cheltenham in 1878, and has a bell tower and porch of 1896, built by F.R. Kempson. The interior has changed little since, and Middleton retains some medieval features, such as the nave roof from the 15th century. The church was Grade 2 listed in June 1992. Situated opposite the west entrance to the parish church is the former primitive Methodist chapel, which opened in 1853. The building behind me dates from 1868, and the chapel closed for worship in 1968. The building was subsequently converted to a private house. Here is the Church of St. Mary in Bledva, adjacent to the Bledva Centre. This was built in the early 13th century, which was extended at the turn of that century, and the West Belcote dates from 1711. The remains of the West Bell Tower can be found to the west of the Belcote, which was presumably destroyed by Owain Glyndwr's troops before the Battle of Bryn Glas. The nave roof dates from the 15th century, and the interior was restored in 1907 by Ernest Collier of Carmarthen. The building was restored by Caps and Caps in 1987, and the church was Grade 1 listed in October 1951. Situated west from the parish church is a former primitive Methodist chapel, built before 1905 in the vernacular style. The building closed for worship during the 20th century, and the building was remodeled from 2009 to 2010. Half a mile east from the village is an isolated Sion Baptist chapel, north of the A488 road. This corrugated iron structure dates from 1898, and these photographs from the 1900s show the early days of the chapel. The building is still a place of worship as of 2022. Placed by the A488 road is a former Calvinistic Methodist chapel, which housed an English Presbyterian church in recent decades. The church, known as the Tanhouse Chapel, was built in 1854. Southwest from that chapel is the parish church of St. Michael, which stands on high ground above the A488 road. This was built from 1833 to 34 by the county surveyor to Radnorshire, replacing a medieval church structure. The building does not have listed status as of 2022, and the Tanhouse Chapel was Grade 2 listed in June 1993. Situated by Dolly Railway Station is a former Baptist chapel, which was built in the simple round-headed style in 1870. This was built 5 years after the station opened on the Heart of Wales line, and the chapel closed for worship in the 2010s. 2 miles north from Dolly is a Calvinistic Methodist chapel from 1902, built in the simple Gothic style. Now an English Presbyterian church, this replaced a chapel from 1842. Situated south of Knighton is a disused Wesleyan Methodist chapel, placed by the B4357 road. Built in 1866, the chapel closed as a place of worship by 2002. The building was covered with trees until the 2010s. I am in the market town of Knighton, which is located on Offers Dyke, built as an ancient earthwork that divided the countries of Wales and England. The town and community of Knighton is also in Shropshire, England, but all the churches in the town are in Powys, Wales. The parish church is dedicated to St. Edward, one of two churches in Wales dedicated to that saint. He was the national patron saint of England prior to St. George in 1350. The church was first built in the 11th century, and the West Bell Tower was built in the medieval times. The church was rebuilt in 1752, and this engraving from the mid-19th century shows the Georgian church. This was rebuilt from 1875 to 77 by S. Pantley Smith of Shrewsbury, and the chancel was built from 1896 to 97 by J. L. Pearson. The stained glass in the church dates from 1901, but the stained glass in the east end window dates from 1897. The chancel is based on the early English style, and the church was Grade II listed in December 1950. Placed by West Street is a former Wesleyan Methodist chapel, built to the designs of Wilson and Wilcox in 1869. The chapel closed as a place of worship by 2001, and has been used as a storeroom since. The Baptist Church in Norton Street and Russell Street dates from 1865, designed by J. E. Morris of Landrindod Wells in the Gothic style. The building was renovated in 1922, when galleries were added. The building was Grade II listed on 30th of September 1985, 12 decades after it opened on 29th of September 1865. Situated in Victoria Road, it is a former Baptist chapel, built in the Gothic style in 1904. The building housed a Baptist chapel until 1990, when it housed the Methodist Church from that year onwards. Situated in Broad Street is another closed Wesleyan Methodist chapel, first built in 1802 and rebuilt in 1860. This was remodeled in 1980 as private houses. Here is the Roman Catholic Church in Knighton, dedicated to Our Lady of Perpetual Succor and Saint Nicholas. The building was built to a design by Thomas Price in 1974, and this replaced an earlier Catholic church in the town from 1958, housed in a former tannery. The building was built on the site of the tannery, and the church was opened and consecrated on 12th of December 1975. Situated 3 miles northwest from Knighton is Nuckless, which has a Baptist chapel built as a memorial to Vavasor Powell. Born in Nuckless in 1617, he is remembered for establishing what may be the oldest independent church in Wales in 1640. The chapel in Nuckless, in the simple round-headed style, dates from 1924. There used to be a Wesleyan Methodist chapel in Nuckless back then, and this was housed in a corrugated iron structure from 1850. The building is now used as a storeroom. The Church of St. David is situated a mile west from Nuckless, and was built from 1880 to 82 by J. L. Pearson of London. The building was built on the site of a medieval church, which was photographed shortly before its demolition in 1880. The bell tower retains some medieval masonry, and the shingled spire dates from 1967. The interior has decent floor tiles in the chancel, designed by William Godwin of Herefordshire, England. The church was Grade II listed in April 1972. Placed by the B4355 road is a former primitive Methodist chapel, built of stone in late 1851. The chapel opened in June 1852, and was a place of worship until the 1960s, when it was converted to a private house. Situated many miles northwest is the village and community of Begildy, which has a parish church dedicated to St. Michael. The building was established by the 13th century, although it was rebuilt in the 15th century. The West Bell Tower collapsed during the 19th century, which was replaced by a bellcote in 1896. The church was restored by W. H. Bryden during this time, and the chancel was rebuilt in 1885. Bryden retained the arched brace roof of 14 bays, which dates from around 1500, and he also retained the rood screen in the chancel, which dates from around 1500 as well. The majority of stained glass in the church is from the mid to late 20th century, including the glass in the east end window, which dates from 1954. The church was Grade 2 star listed in October 1951. Placed 2 miles north from Bagildy is this hamlet, which has an English Baptist church. Built in 1852 of the Gothic style, this is still in use as a place of worship as of 2022. Placed by the River Teme is the former Wesleyan Methodist Chapel, built in the Gothic style in 1876. This replaced an earlier chapel from 1827, and the chapel closed for worship in the 20th century. The building was redeveloped as a private house in 2009. A mile northwest from that settlement is the first church by the River Teme, dedicated to St. Peter. This was built from 1854 to 55 by Henry Lote, and was renovated in 1967 by George Pace, when he inserted clear glass in the windows. The church closed as a place of worship by the 2000s, and the building was converted to a private house in the early 2010s. The last building I will look at in this episode is the Bethel Methodist Chapel, built around 1850 and enlarged in 1877. The stone structure was remodeled to a private house in 2021, and this closed as a place of worship during the 20th century. I am at Knighton to end this episode, with St. Edward Parish Church seen behind me. I enjoyed looking at religious buildings around Knighton, and I will continue looking at them in the next episode as I head south to Prestine.